As I mentioned earlier, today we celebrate the feast of St. Lawrence, who was one of the early deacons in the church. He was not just a deacon, he was an archdeacon. He served Pope Sixtus II. He was his right-hand person. And it was during the persecution of the Christians in Rome, and I think it was Emperor Valerian arrested the Pope and the rest of his deacons and was marching them off to be put to death. And Lawrence pleaded with Pope Sixtus. He said, I've served you at your right-hand side. Why are you leaving me behind? He said, don't worry, in 3 days, you'll follow me. And so Valerian, learning about all of the wealth of the church at the time, that the people would give to the church to provide for the poor and for other things, and all the sacred vessels that were either in silver or gold, and the candlesticks. And he said to Lawrence, I want you to give me all of the wealth of the kingdom, of the church. Give it to me. And Lawrence said, give me 3 days to collect it. And so he went out and he basically liquidated all of the assets of the church, and he gave it to the poor and to the people who really, really needed it, the sick, the blind. And then he went out and he collected as many blind and lame and leprous people and crippled people that he could find. And he lined them up in ranks. And when Valerian came to him and said, okay, give me the riches of the church. And he said, here are the riches of the church: the poor and the blind, the sick and the lame. Valerian was so livid that he not only put him to death, but he tied him onto a metal grate and lit a fire underneath him, just hot enough, not that it would catch him on fire right away, that he would bake slowly in an agonizing death. Lawrence was so thrilled to be martyred that after he'd been tortured this way for a long time, he looked at his torturers and he said, I think I'm done on this side. You can flip me over now. He was so thrilled about the prospect of dying for God that he would be a martyr, then he would see his friend Sixtus in heaven, that it didn't matter anymore. He knew what was important in life, that we take care of those who really need our help, just as it says in the scripture passages we heard, but also that this life here on earth is temporary. And the purpose for it is to prepare us for the life to come. Sometimes we forget that. And it's so easy to get mired in the sadness of death when we realize that for those who have lived a good life, death is just the movement to the next stage of their life. A life that could be filled with such joy that we can't begin to imagine. But in order to fulfill God's work here on earth, we have to be willing to be like Lawrence, to get our priorities straight. Sometimes it means sacrificing for other people who are in greater need than we are. A friend of mine grew up in the Soviet Union, and he was an atheist, but they were taught that all about the Bible, but they were taught that it was kind of like Aesop's fables, that it were just stories, that they weren't true. And I'm sure you probably heard the story about, unless a grain of wheat fall to the ground, it's nothing but a grain of wheat. But if it's buried and it dies to itself, it becomes fruitful and bears stalks of wheat that have hundreds of little grains of wheat. We're called to be like that, to die to self, that others may bear fruit from our sacrifices. My friends told me one time that his grandfather was in World War I in Russia, and he was a great hero. He got a gold medal and a silver medal that would be roughly equivalent of our Silver Star for valor. And they were greatly held in esteem, as you can imagine. But during the Great Famine in Russia, he sold them because he needed bread to feed his family. My friend replicated them. He made facsimiles of these medals, and he had them hanging in in his basement as a tribute to his grandfather, but the sacrifice that he made in war to win those medals was nothing compared to the sacrifice of giving those medals away to sell them for bread for his kids to eat. And that sacrifice meant that my friend's parents could live and that he would live and bear fruit, continue. And he has a child of his own. Sometimes we don't recognize just how powerful the gifts that we give to others are. Sometimes it's a gift of money, sometimes it's a gift of food, sometimes it's just a gift of time. To make the time to let people know how important they are in our eyes and how important they are in the eyes of God. If we can make those kind of sacrifices, death is not the end, but just the beginning of the greatest journey we'll ever take.